Welcome back to a year of Final Fantasy, and we are in the Month of Ramuh. In this month, we're putting a spotlight on the large spin-off series of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Today we're going to look at the second installment in this branch of games, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Ring of Fates. So that is a pretty long title, so let's see, what is it all about? Well, for starters, it was released on the DS in late 2007 in Japan and early 2008 for pretty much the rest of the world. Similar to the previous games, it's an action-adventure game, and it has the same aesthetics as the first game. This is not like a regular Final Fantasy game with turn-based combat if you haven't seen my other video, and all of these Crystal Chronicle games are in the same world, again, unlike the main Final Fantasy games. So I won't spend all the time going over the set and setting and all of that. I've already talked about that in the original Crystal Chronicles video, so you can refer to that if you want to, but I will talk about specific things about this game. So there are some interesting elements in this game that do differentiate itself from the previous one. What differentiates this game from the original ones is that this game is actually a prequel to the original. Now, I don't go over the story aspect of Final Fantasy games too much, since that's one of the major parts in the draws of Final Fantasy, and I wouldn't want to ruin the experience in that way. The races in this game are still there, except you don't really make your own character, at least for the single player portion of the game. It's actually set up more like a traditional Final Fantasy in that way. Here we are given the antagonists and we see how they're set in the world already. That's a good thing in my opinion. So as we see these characters, at least in the single player game, there's something to note about the races now, and they're basically more tied heavily to class roles than possibly the previous game. And what I mean by that is that whenever you pick your race, you're basically picking your class. Well, there are actually quite a few differences from the original game. The races themselves, the names haven't changed, but the focus of the races have. Again, I'm using class and race interchangeably. So the Clavets now are heavily focused and they're basically your warrior class, whereas they used to be an all-around class or race. Now they are strictly warriors. The Ukes, the guys with the helmets on their heads, are still your magic using class. This is actually the only race that hasn't really been altered in any kind of noticeable or significant way. The Selkies now are actually primarily archers instead of thieves or rogues. So they kind of still have that overall dexterity based theme, but they are more focused on archers. They don't have a heavy negative connotation that the word thief or rogue does. And last, we have the Lilties, and if you'll remember, they used to be the warrior class, kind of like dwarves. I mean, I hesitate to say that because they're a plant-based race, but clearly they were at least somewhat envisioned by the dwarves that we know today. But the Lilties have actually gone from a warrior type of race, which are now the Clavets, to alchemists. They still remain somewhat in their original vision. They do wield hammers and maces and spoons for whatever reason. But those are your big changes to the race/classes. So as I mentioned above, there is a single player mode. There is actually also a multiplayer mode, so there are two different ways you can play this game. Multiplayer pretty much functions as you would expect it to. In multiplayer, unlike single player, you in fact do make your own characters, just like the original game. But customization is a little bit more limited than it used to be. I'm going to chalk that up to the limitations of the DS, and particularly the size of the DS carts. Multiplayer is in fact tied to the story, which is something you may not see very often in a game like this. It's similar to Phantasy Star Online, which is actually one of my favorite games ever. Which is to say that as you progress through the game, through the single player game, you'll actually unlock more stuff in the multiplayer part of the game. There's also a welcome change that there is no longer a miasma mechanic with dragging the crystal with you to fight in that radius. That was a pretty big detractor for me in the original Crystal Chronicles. I mean, it wasn't like a game-breaking thing, but it's just, another thing that you have to deal with, so I'm happy to see it go. The multiplayer in this game is actually fantastic as well, just as good as the original, and it's pretty much a hallmark of the series that they keep nailing down with all of these games. I love it. There are a few more differences mechanically that I should definitely note. The spells are the big one. Spells still come from Magicite, but now as you cast them, you actually use up that Magicite, so it adds risk versus reward inventory management aspect to the game. In single player, the inventory is actually shared by your entire party, and there's other concessions made like that in this game, and I'm going to chalk that up to the game being on DS again, rather than a larger console game, which usually has a little bit more freedom to be a little bit more precise item-wise. One incredibly welcome feature is that unlike the first game, as you get equipment and as you equip that equipment, you actually change your character's appearance on the game map. This is something I greatly appreciate in action-adventure games like this, and it's the one thing that keeps people coming back because, you know, you want to look better and better and better. It's that gear grind that so many people love about these types of games. So all I'm going to say about the story itself is that it's pretty much more in-depth and personal, and it's much longer than the original game, I think. It was pretty clear that they wanted to push the characters in the story more now that they had pinned down the look and feel and the aesthetic of the entire Crystal Chronicles franchise. And just to reiterate, this game is a prequel to the original game, so you can look out for nods and Easter eggs that relate to the original one. They are there, and it's nice to see the developers acknowledge this. It really creates a more unified, singular story and world, unlike the main Final Fantasy games. So I think that pretty much covers it for the things that I wanted to talk about for this Ring of Fates. Not that this is a review, but if you do find this game, especially if you find it cheap, go ahead and pick it up. It's a pretty good game. You don't hear much about it in general, and it may not be the greatest game ever, but it is a competent, well-made game, and it's definitely one worth playing in my opinion, especially if you enjoy the world and the setting that they presented to you in Crystal Chronicles. Next time on the Month of Ramuh, we will talk about the next game in the series, which is known as Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Echoes of Time. Now, this actually came out both on the Wii and DS, and I will be talking about both of them in the next video. So until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.